half a dozen citizens showed up Monday night at Montreal City Hall for a council meeting to ask Mayor Soraya Martinez-Ferrada to relax the regulations on short-term rentals. Why did so many people show up? Well, perhaps it's because Airbnb invited them to do so. Radio-Canada reporting this week that the company sent out emails to its hosts on the platform to go to City Hall and pressure to the administration to change the current law. That current law only allows short-term rentals for 90 days between June 10th and September 10th. Let's now go to Alex Howell, Canada Policy Lead for Airbnb. Alex, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Let's talk about the mobilization here. You sent out an email to hosts. You said, show up at City Hall. Why?
We always let our hosts know when their representatives are considering making a change to policies that impact them. They showed up to ask the mayor to prioritize making a change that she committed to during the last election and something that really does matter to regular Montreal residents.
So, I like to put my cards on the table. We talked about this story earlier in the week on this program. And I mentioned, listen, I literally just went to Miami. And where did I stay? I stayed at an Airbnb. I do find it hypocritical. If I'm going to use a service all around the world to say I don't want it in my city. So I just want to put that out on the table because I want to be clear for you and clear also for our listeners. But I do hear the people that complain that Airbnb and short-term rentals, they cause pressure on the housing market. What's your counter to that? What's your response? And it's not just Montreal, all types of cities, all around the world have invoked measures against short-term rentals. What do you say to that?
Well, the hosts in Montreal, in residential neighborhoods, are everyday Montrealers. They're sharing their primary residence. This is the place that they live year-round. They have maybe an extra room, or perhaps they're going out of town for a little while and they're making that space available to visitors. Overwhelmingly, these are people using that income to help cover the rising costs of living, including housing. Outside of that, mounting studies and real-world experience continues to prove that regulating short-term rentals has no measurable impact on housing availability. We've seen that in Toronto, we've seen it in Vancouver, we've seen it in New York City very starkly. And federal government data shows that short-term rentals represent only a very small share of Montreal's overall housing stock. This is fundamentally a supply issue. The solution to the housing crisis is to build more homes, not restrict regular Montrealers who occasionally are sharing their space to make a little bit of extra money.
So here's where I'll give you some pushback here because, I think we've all, Montrealers have all seen, how some condo towers became de facto Airbnb hotels. And I'll use your branding term Airbnb, but I can, there's other short-term rental companies out there. So they're using all types of platforms. I've seen it, in fact, in the past where it's just one condo, there's so many listings in one building, okay? And, when I hear the notion, well, it's just a homeowner and they're renting out an extra room, boy, I'm like, yeah, they should be able to pull in that extra money. But then I sort of hear these other stories where I'm like, no, this is lending itself to actually a big business, like someone who's doing this and has tons of apartments for rent, tons of condos. So, I'm trying to square that circle here because you're telling a different story from things that I've seen with my own eyes in the past.
Overwhelmingly, hosts on our platform have a single home on the platform. It's often their primary residence, or it's a secondary home like a cottage or somewhere that they use for part of the year, but not all of it. In Montreal specifically, there are some zones that are zoned to allow for full-time, non-permanent resident short-term rentals. And this was done because these are areas where there's a high tourist density, and local businesses that rely on those tourists coming in to help keep their businesses afloat have specifically requested those areas that are, tourist commercial areas to be used for have short-term rentals be allowed for non-primary residents. But that's a very specific case. Overwhelmingly in Montreal, you're talking about short-term rentals that are in people's primary residence, and that's what we're asking the mayor to change. We're not talking about allowing additional zones to be secondary residences, anything like that. This is literally just changing the seasonal ban, which the mayor actually committed to during the campaign, so that these full-time residents are allowed to rent out their space throughout the year.
We're with Alex Howell, Canada Policy Lead for Airbnb. Can I ask you, and you referenced a whole bunch of cities, and I've seen some of those reports you referenced where, you can put these regulations on short-term rentals. Doesn't necessarily do anything to improve the cost of housing. But for you and the leadership at Airbnb, are you okay with any type of regulations? Do you think there can be, compromise positions, a soft hand for cities and other governments to use here when it comes to short-term rentals?
We are not against all regulations. That's not our position as a company. We support fair and balanced rules that allow people to share their homes, that support the tourism industry, and that make sure that the city is able to know who's operating, for example, make sure that they have the proper license, that sort of thing. But what we have in Montreal is not that. Right now, it's a very complicated system. Even down to the way that you get a license in Montreal. You have to go in person. You have to line up in a single borough. It takes a lot of time. It's very complicated. Those sorts of rules don't make sense. And what they do is they actually suppress compliance. They make it more difficult to get hosts and people that want to share their homes appropriately licensed and operating, within the rules.
Would it be possible for you to limit hosting to one property per city for one person? Is that actually something that you could do? Or is there so many ways around it that it's difficult to track? Because, I think for a lot of people, they're amenable to an idea, again, of that homeowner who just has that room or that extra unit to rent, but they're not amenable to big business getting involved here. Can you do that? Does your platform allow that?
So the rules differ from city to city. We don't have a platform that can be completely customizable to every single situation and every rule. It's really down to the city to make their rules and to enforce them. If they say, for example, that you are only allowed to rent in a specific type of residence or only in your primary residence, it's down to them to only issue those licenses to the people who are allowed to do so. And then to enforce against those who don't. It's really not the place of a private business to be trying to work around that sort of thing.
Last thing, have you been successful in other cities? Have you been able to turn back regulation? It seems like once cities act, they are so hesitant to go back on these things.
We've seen it happen actually increasingly in the last little while. An example I can give you actually from just last month is the city of Kelowna in British Columbia. The BC government put in place very strict rules. And just last month, the city of Kelowna decided to overrule that and to opt out of those provincial rules to allow for more short-term rentals, to allow them in these commercial tourist districts specifically. And that's really because they saw such a big impact on tourism locally. They saw significant challenges for restaurants, for wineries, for those places that really rely on an influx of tourists who weren't coming because they couldn't find affordable places to stay. And so they acted swiftly, and that's what we're asking the mayor of Montreal and the city council to do as well.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, Alex. Thanks so much for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much.
Alex Howell, Canada Policy Lead for Airbnb.
I'm Luke Wilson. Join me each week for Film Never Lies. Since retiring from the NFL, I've had a lot on my mind, and now I've got my own show. So if you're tired of lazy takes, if you want honest conversations, join us each week. Film Never Lies, available on all TSN platforms and the iHeartRadio app.